Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of Philosophy Roundtable. The first episode was over 6 months ago, and I can confidently say that episode 3 won't take as long to be released. Not only that, but I can also confidently say that episode 3 will be more structured as we continue to find our footing. Anyways, this is a really off the cuff episode where we ramble about the advent of artificial intelligence and its effects on the job sector as well as its effects on the human psyche. Emphasis on off the cuff. If you're interested, you can join the Discord server that we just created. The invite is in the description of the video below. With that, I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Babylon Project. As always, I'm your host, Vern, alongside my trusty co-host, Mr. Bruce. Bruce, how are you doing today?
It's been a long time since we did one of these, Vern. It's good to be back.
It's been a long time, and it feels really good to be back. It's going to be nice to stretch our legs, get back into the groove of things. It's been a while since we've had a conversation with someone outside of ourselves. So who knows? We'll see how it goes. For all we know, we could probably just be the worst people to have a conversation with just because we're so rusty or however it may be. But let's see how it goes. We have the honor of having the ever wonderful Mr. Angel Eduardo, who's a writer, a musician, a photographer, and designer based in New York City. He works as the senior writer and editor for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, or FIRE, as many of you may know it. And he serves as chair of the board of directors for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, or FAIR, as you may know them. Mr. Angel, how are you doing today?
Doing great, man. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for coming on. When me and Bruce were kind of like thinking of guests to have on, your name is always at the top of our list because one, you do have you do engage in a lot of the types of conversations that we do, and it is far reaching, right? The thing that we love talking about with you is, for one, not only can we just talk about something related to fire, talk about something related to fair, but we can also even go into things like Superman or kickboxing or MMA, whatever it may be. And so it's really great to have you here. We're really excited. And it's wonderful to be able to speak with you again.
Cool. Yeah. It's great to be here.
One of the things that we did want to talk to you about is because right now in the United States, there's some interesting stuff's happening. There was the little election that occurred not too long ago that many people are upset about. And one of the things that I found interesting, and I think that you're the perfect guy to talk about this with, is that the zeitgeist and the public attitudes and opinions about things like free speech, things like misinformation, disinformation, people are starting to shift their opinions, or they're starting to think twice about it. And there's many people coming from either whatever direction you want to say that seems to be abandoning things like a principle of free speech, abandoning or at least changing their views on it in a way in which that they weren't as staunchly pro free speech as they were beforehand. And so one of the things that you were discussing in one of your articles is this new concept called star manning that you coined, I believe, right? You came up with it. It's yours.
Yeah,
no one can take it. Okay.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I coined it.
It's really interesting, and it seems like it's in the same lineage as steel manning. And so I guess, first thing before we get into the conversation, would you mind kind of giving a description of what you mean by star manning, and what is the difference between that and steel manning?
Sure. Well, the steel man is basically engaging with the strongest possible version of your opponent's argument, which is meant to offset the issues with what's called straw manning, which is caricaturing your opponent's argument and misinterpreting it, putting up a weaker version that's easier to tear down. That's why it's called a straw man. And, you should steel man. That's the way you should do it because it's more honest and more productive and more fair. But most people have trouble steel manning. And the reason why is because they are not just straw manning the other side's arguments, they're straw manning the other side. They're straw manning the people who hold those ideas and opinions that are different than them. They're caricaturing those people. And so I came up with this term star manning, to go a step beyond steel manning, which is to engage with the strongest and most charitable version, not just of your opponent's argument, but also of your opponent. And you do this by locating and explicitly acknowledging the fundamental human desires and values that are motivating them, that are informing their perspectives and their arguments. And those are values that you share because you're also a human being. So it's just a way of creating some common ground on a fundamental level, even if you disagree strongly on I guess the top level of whatever the actual argument or the issue is.
Hmm.
Right. So you can disagree strongly about abortion or something, right? A really hot topic, but you can if you do the work, you can find the reasons why people might disagree with your stance on abortion, and people might have a very strong feeling in the other direction. And it's not because they're stupid or evil. It's because they're they're emphasizing different values, and you can see those values and you can say, okay, well, I understand that, and I definitely also value those things, but my calculations come out differently because of XYZ. And then now you're talking, but at least you're not creating this monster in your mind of this other person. So that's the idea behind star manning. It's just to try to break through this roadblock that we all have, that we've instinctively created, which is to assume automatically that anybody who disagrees with something we feel strongly about must be either totally stupid or, hopelessly just evil
Hmm.
and irredeemable. And that's just not the case. Life is way more complicated than that. People are more complicated than that. And why they believe what they believe is more complicated than that.
So if you have, for example, two people debating about abortion,
Mm-hmm.
one person is pro-life, the other one is pro-choice. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
the pro-choice person thinking that, well, the pro-life person, whatever their arguments may be, they just kind of they're. It's not okay to want to control women's bodies. It's not okay to want to
Mm-hmm.
dictate to the other part of the country that disagrees with you what it is
Mm-hmm.
that they can and can't do with their body. Like that would be an example of kind of viewing the person itself, like regardless of what the argument is, you're just viewing the person maliciously, and because of that you're not really engaging with that conversation. And so would it
Right.
be safe to say like star manning in that case would be something like, no, they don't want to control women's bodies, rather is that they want to preserve life, they think this is a living thing, they want to
Right.
preserve life. I also want to preserve life, and so the difference between us isn't about that, we both share that value. It's just we're
Mm-hmm.
disagreeing about what constitutes life, and then we can have the debate from there. Would you say it's like a good way of
That's
viewing?
yeah. That's exactly right. It's drilling down to not just here's what your argument is, like repeat your argument. Let me repeat your argument back to you in a way that you would agree with so that I'm sure that I've got it right. I take it a step further and say, and let me try to understand why you care about this. Why do you hold this position? What are the things motivating you? And yeah, in that case, it would be, I want to protect the unborn. That to me is a precious life, and I want to take care of it. And I feel like abortion is murder, and murder is wrong. So that's why I hold my position, right?
Mhm.
And you can flip it the other way as well, right? Like, I care very much about my own bodily autonomy, as a woman. That's not something that historically has always been granted to me. It took a lot of work and a lot of strife, a lot of effort for women to attain that autonomy, to be able to just control their own life decisions and be able to live their lives the way they like, right? So I'm very protective of that, and this is now impeding on that. So that's just something you can at the very least understand, even if you still end up disagreeing overall on the abortion thing, right?
Mhm.
Because it's a complicated issue, but at least you're humanizing the other person, and you're not just turning them into this villain who wants to, you know, just cackling maniacally while murdering babies. You know what I mean? Or like wanting to put women in chains and oppress them. Like those are cartoons. Those are not real. I mean, sure, maybe there's some people who actually feel that way, but I would imagine that is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of people, and something's wrong with them, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the concerns I think that a lot of people can have with this, and I also have similar concerns after reading Jonathan Rauch, who wrote a wonderful book called The Constitution of Knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part in there where he talks about just how incredibly biased we are as human beings, and we're biased in a way that oftentimes we can't even describe. And so, even though we're inclined to believe a certain proposition based on the evidence that we see, for all
Mm-hmm.
we know, that proposition was already set in place. One of the psychologists that he cites is Jonathan Haidt, where he says that reason is more like the passenger seat in a car or the person on
Mm-hmm.
top of an elephant, whereas um,
Right.
the way that we act and the way that we believe our beliefs is like the elephant driving it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, because our biases are so strong, it's not very likely that people are actually consistent or actually believe in the principles that they claim to believe. So, as an
Right.
example, one of the many blackpilling moments that I've had as of late is regarding let's say and this isn't disparaging against Trump supporters at all. Let me just It's just an example, but someone who supports Trump, for example, and I've had this conversation multiple times. They support him because he's very, very pro-Constitution, right? Or very pro-America, saying that the Democrats don't care about the Constitution, right? We need to go back to the
Right.
Constitution, support Trump or whatever it is.
Right.
But then when you point towards examples that contradict that, let's say the birthright citizenship, trying to repeal it, you
Mm-hmm.
point to that example. Let's say point to this example. What about like the fake electors, right? Um, Almost always, instead of just saying, okay, yeah, maybe I'll have to look into that, or actually, maybe I have to recalibrate my opinions, because if I am pro Constitution and that's my value that I have, maybe I'll have to
Mm-hmm.
change my opinions. It's I want to say almost never. It's never the case from what I've seen. It's almost always or always the case that they'll try to post hoc justify it instead of just,
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it seems like tribal loyalty is often stronger than the values that a lot of people claim to espouse, a lot of the principles.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing that I'm worried about is that even though people can claim that they hold principles that they hold, their behaviors say otherwise. And if their behaviors say otherwise, then maybe trying to focus on the alleged principles that people have isn't that's not really the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is something else. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I'm worried that if you can't even appeal to certain values, because those values aren't even where the beliefs are coming from in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
then is there another way that we can look at star manning, or is star manning still effective, or um, I don't know,
Uh,
maybe just pessimistic about it.
no, no. I just think that that's part of the work. Is, for example, if someone is claiming to, let's just say, for example, I'm pro Trump because he's pro free speech, and that's something I really care about. And then you'd bring up something like, for example, the Iowa pollster who made a wrong prediction and said that Kamala was going to beat him by 3 points in Iowa, and it turns out Trump won by 13 points, so she was way off. And now Trump is suing this person because she made a wrong prediction, right? But there's nothing about making a wrong prediction that is defamatory or a consumer fraud is what he's alleging, right? So it's clearly, and it's something that is a pattern of behavior for Trump as well. Um, using the legal system, abusing his money and power to threaten, intimidate, bully, and silence people. Using a lawsuit to punish people, and he's literally said, you know, uh, I did this because it cost me a few bucks, but it ruined his time, his life. It ruined his day, and it cost him way more. And I'm happy about that. And I don't care that I'm not going to win the lawsuit. The point clearly is punishing this person for something they said that he didn't like. That's not very free speechy, right?
Mhm.
So bringing that up, and if this person who is supporting him on the basis of free speech tries to find a way to deflect about that or whatever, right? Whatever kind of argument they use to pretzel logic their way around that inconsistency. Well, that reveals to me that there's something else going on, right? This person is saying it's about free speech, but clearly it's not. There's something deeper. So you have to dig even deeper. So you have to ask more questions and try to figure out what is this really about. So, you said a minute ago that in-group loyalty, tribal loyalty is more important, right? But even that isn't sufficient. Why is that? Why is the in-group loyalty so important? Why is that such a an important piece that's being moved here, right? Like why is that such a motivator? What does this person get out of that fervent loyalty, that unyielding loyalty to their tribe? What is it that they get from that?
Mhm.
What are they benefiting from doing that? And it would be like, oh well, I have all these people now. I don't feel alone. These people like me. I've invested a lot of time and money and energy into this, and I don't want to give all that up and feel like I've wasted my time. Right? I'm just guessing, but those are potential reasons for why a person behaves in a way that seems inconsistent on the surface. If you drill down enough, you will find the consistency because you will realize, okay, really what they're worried about is, for example, I want to be liked by these people that I like. So I'm going to fight really, really hard to be as much like them as possible, to agree with them as much as possible, to defend them as much as possible. And I'm going to be willing to ignore any cognitive dissonance. I'm going to ignore these counter arguments. I'm going to find clever ways of getting around those arguments because what I really, really want is to stay here with my friends. And I want my friends to like me because if I start pushing back on them, if I start disagreeing with them, they might kick me out of the group and then I'll be alone. Right. That's just a hypothetical example, but that's something that if you ask enough questions and the right questions, you can drill down and figure that out. And then from there, you can kind of figure out a way to move forward, right? You can say like, well, have you noticed, that there are all these things and you always seem to have some way around them, but that's a lot of stuff, like what is it that you're getting out of this, right? And it's really about a series of conversations. It's really about a series of attempts to really deeply understand one another, or at least for you to deeply understand the other person so that you can try to persuade them if that's what you want to be doing, or so that you can oppose them more effectively, right? Maybe it's not about persuasion, but if you want to be effective in your opposition to an idea or a group or whatever, you have to really understand it, right? You have to know what they're doing. We were talking about martial arts right before we came on. If you don't know, if you don't understand how like kicks and punches work, you're probably not going to be very good at blocking them, right? And you're probably not going to be very good at countering them because you have no idea the mechanics of it. But once you start understanding, this is how they work. This is the way people kind of brace their bodies when they're preparing to do a kick or do a punch. Once you understand those things, it almost becomes instinctive. You're not thinking of it consciously, but you just know, okay, a punch is coming from this way. So I know that I can deflect. I know that I've got certain moves. It's very similar, right? You have to understand the situation you're in. You have to understand what's actually going on with the person you're engaging with. And if you don't, then your job should cease to be, trying to get your goal accomplished, which is, I want to defeat them or change their mind or whatever. And it should be, I need to understand more. I'm not ready. I'm not ready to counter this person yet because I don't understand. You know what I mean? So it's the difficulty is inherent in the situation. The difficulty is inevitable and inescapable. There's no other way except through it. You have to just sit there and hunker down and try to engage and try to figure out what's actually happening. And you can make your guesses, and if those guesses are wrong, you got to start over. It's a laborious process because it's complicated. This stuff is rough. Mm-hmm.
It really is a laborious process, and this is something I've had a few questions I wanted to ask you based on several of our last conversations. I think one of the ones I want to start out with is the idea of taking offense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Part of the reason having a conversation with someone is so difficult is because this really, speaking on any kind of contentious topic, really raises everyone's triggers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a distinguishment between two kinds of offense that is offered. And the example I'll use here is like between two people, between like Milo Yiannopoulos and Christopher Hitchens. So like, many of us who are fans of Hitchens, like we all really enjoy his commentary, and there are quite a few people out there who would claim or even like to be his intellectual heir, especially when it comes to the idea of giving them a hitch slap. But
Right.
there are people out there who, in my not so humble opinion, think that the hitch slap is the point, not just a side effect of what he was trying to get across. And to offer an
Mm-hmm.
example right now is like I think all three of us here identify as being atheist, and we may say something on the lines of the stories in the Bible, Hebrew Bible, the Quran, or whatever. They aren't anything more than a bunch of collection of fairy tales. And Judeo-Christian values endorse homophobia and slavery. But I just said all of that, and I personally believe this is true. A full disclosure,
Mm-hmm.
but nowhere in what I just said, and in nowhere in my intention was the idea to go out there and try to insult, offend, or doing that to anybody. I'm just pointing out that that's
Mm-hmm.
clearly what states in
Mm-hmm.
the books, and that's objectively what these religions had to or having to move past.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to the example between Milo and Hitch, Milo Yiannopoulos would go out there and offend for the point, not for the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're having these conversations with somebody, like I think like being optimistic here, most of us would like to speak with the idea of trying to understand the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But whenever we have in these conversations, like even I don't do this. Even I don't do this well. The bile rises, the instinct to just blurt something out just comes right out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All of that just happens. And like, do you think people really understand the difference between Amalia Yiannopoulos and a Christopher Hitchens? During the dialogue, or like does that stuff just go out the window whenever we talk? Is
Mm,
offense going to be taken one way or the other, whether it's
no,
a prescription or a direct insult? Is that
I don't.
yeah?
I don't think so. But your your mileage may vary. I mean, you know, Hitchens was Hitchens was acerbic on purpose. Like he engaged in debates, and part of a debate is winning. And so, he employed a bunch of rhetorical tactics, and he was prickly, and he knew how to insult, and he knew how to he knew how to do the thing. He is much more eloquent and intelligent, in my opinion, than someone like Milo, who is much more of a kind of street level kind of provocateur. Like I'm just gonna prod you. Hitchens obviously is extremely erudite and extremely intelligent. So his method for doing the thing was very different. And of course, he is making a lot of solid rhetorical points in his arguments, but he's also someone who engaged in just insult because he knew the dunk would be good. He knew that he would get a laugh, and that was a way of getting around certain things, and also a way of just defeating his opponent. So it's not a very clear bright line necessarily. But I take your point, which is you know there are people who make our job harder because they're going out there intentionally trying to upset people or provoke people, or they're kind of they're not even necessarily trying to, but they are kind of a bull in a china shop and making a big mess and making it harder for someone who wants to be more careful and nuanced. So there's that. And then of course there are people who are bound to take offense pretty much no matter what you say. Sure, those people exist. But again, you can just be someone who tries to be self-aware about it, right? So if it's something, if like for example, right, you said the Holy Scriptures, right, the Bible, all that stuff, fairy tales. You use the phrase fairy tales. That's automatically going to offend some people who take it very, very seriously and
Yes,
who care
yes,
about it very much.
yeah.
And they're going to feel, because fairy tales are for children, they're little fake stories for children. And so the connotation there's automatically negative. And so you're obviously you're free to have that opinion. And, I happen to agree with that. Well, not necessarily, like, but I get what you're trying to say, and I agree with what you're trying to say. Like, these are fictions, and a lot of them are not great, and that kind of stuff. But if you're talking to someone who's a believer, you have to recognize where they're coming from, and if your goal is to get through to them, or at least have them understand your perspective a little better, then I would avoid something like fairy tales, because I recognize that without even having to be told, or without having to experience it in that moment, that calling them fairy tales is probably not going to do you any favors, right? So you can say I would, and it's not like tone policing yourself. It's not about that. It's not about self-censoring. It's just about what is your goal here, right? If your goal is just to vent, right? If you're talking to a bunch of atheists who agree with you and you just want to vent,
Yeah.
you can say whatever you like, and they'll just be like, hell yeah, or whatever, right? But if you're trying to engage with somebody who believes these things, um, us, presumably you want them to hear you out, and there are right and wrong ways to approach that goal. If you want people to hear you out, generally speaking, you want to make them feel heard and respected, right? And you'll want to avoid tripping up on things like that are inadvertently, right? You don't mean to disrespect them, but it's very understandable why they might take something like that the wrong way, or they might take offense to that, right? So that's just an example. And it's a tricky thing. It's an art, right? Some people are like, yeah, call them whatever you want. I don't care. I still believe it. That's your opinion. There are people who've got that kind of constitution, but then there are other people who are like, whoa, 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 man, you can't be talking about my very, very important stuff like that, right? Like, imagine imagine someone talking about martial arts and saying, oh, that's just basically like dancing, right? Like karate and jujitsu, like you're just rolling around on the floor with guys, right? So like, I can see someone like you who's done martial arts getting extremely upset about that. Just being like, dude, you're disrespecting this incredible art form, this incredible practice, this discipline, right? That's hundreds of years, thousands of years old in some cases. You're completely disrespecting it, and you're minimizing it. You're caricaturing it, right? So it's the same thing. It's I hold these things in very high regard. I care about them deeply, and you're diminishing them with the way you're framing it. That's going to put you in a different headspace where you're going to be like, this guy's an idiot. I don't want to talk to somebody who doesn't even understand how how important and robust martial arts are, right? So it's the same thing. It's just, in order to communicate, we have to do our best to try to adopt the perspective of the other person, and recognize that they hold those values in the same kind of way about different things. And you could say that, oh, I'm somebody who barely gets offended, right? It's almost impossible for me to be offended. Like, for you to offend me, you have to be trying to offend me, and the thing that will offend me won't be what you actually say. It'll be the fact that you're trying to offend me, right? That's how I am.
Yeah.
But not everybody's like that. So it's just, remember what you're trying to do, and once you recognize what your goal is, then it becomes clear that there are better and worse ways to approach it.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because you actually brought up a something that just flashed through my mind about this particular point. And one of the questions I have regarding this is like, how far do we need to soften the truth? I think I mentioned earlier that I'm a fan
Mm-hmm.
of using Peter Boghossian's street epistemology. That seems to be a good way to get people, including myself, to think carefully about
Yeah.
an issue and try to explore the roots of it. But
Mm-hmm.
since we're on the subject of martial arts, I'm reminded of one specific figure who cannot know the late great Bruce Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, like, if anyone knows anything about Bruce Lee, he wasn't just a movie star. He was an advocate for finding truth in combat, and he was an iconoclast. He was very, very famous for going out there and saying, to me, and I quote, 99.9% of Asian martial arts are bullshit. He would just flat out say that and say, like, I can't believe these people are eating up all the stuff. And like, here in America, they have their own art of boxing that is
Uh-huh.
pretty much more functional. Why aren't you guys like picking that up instead?
Mm-hmm.
And but he really illustrates something for me here, because his brashness, his directness, it offended people, but he made his point. very, very clearly. So yeah, I'm wondering in this case, how far do we, how far do you often go, do you have to go to soften the truth? Now, I'm not advocating go out there and be a dick or
Mm-hmm.
go out there to deliberately try to upset somebody, but I also see the value in going the other direction, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious where exactly the happy medium is. Like, when it comes to things like gender ideology, anti-Semitism, Trump, the woke
Yeah.
left, what have
Mm-hmm.
you. And we were mentioning earlier the subjects regarding like calling religions fairy tales. There's the obvious, very, very real threat of fundamentalist Islam today, and illustrating to people that the stuff they believe is based on stories from the 7th century. That seems to be a flat out
Mm-hmm.
truth that has to be clearly stated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but even as you say, these are difficult things to swallow, even in a good faith conversation, and the conversations like this can go awry very, very, very quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
admittedly, I'm a fan of speaking in a very, very straightforward fashion. Now, I said straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say be a dick or
Yeah.
whatnot.
Right.
And in my experience working with teachers and coaches, the best ones are always the ones who are very direct and straightforward with you. But they're not. But they make it clear that I'm not trying to be a jerk. But you need to hear what I'm trying to hear. But like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's that's not always an easy balance to strike. I'm
Yeah.
kind of curious as what your take is on this, like the Bruce Lee
Um,
approach, the yeah, or whatnot.
well, again, it depends on context and who you're talking to and what you're trying to get out of it, right? So, we're here sitting here, and I can be like, yeah, I mean, that's all nonsense, right? And I can say nonsense. But if I'm talking to somebody who believes this thing that I call nonsense, if I just go, listen, everything you believe is nonsense, the conversation's probably going to stop right there, right? I would instead ask questions or find some other way to be like, look, I don't believe these things, but here's why. Here's why I don't believe these things, right? So I've had conversations, for example, I've done a few podcasts um with religious believers, and we're talking about religious belief. And I just bring up what my questions are, what my concerns are. I'm like, well, look, here's the thing. Um, there are babies that are born already dying of AIDS. They live this horrible, excruciating agony for 15 minutes, and then they're gone. They die. What is the point of that? What God would do that? Right? That's my issue. I can't figure out how to deal with that. I can't reconcile that reality with this concept of a loving God, right? It doesn't make any sense. And I've asked people, but I don't get it. So like how do you deal with that? And I'll put the question to them. That's a different circumstance, right? Because I'm just pointing out the difficulty. I'm not hiding anything or softening anything. I'm not obscuring what I believe or don't believe or why. I'm just presenting it in a way that's more conducive to some kind of productive engagement, right? So again, like you said, soften the truth, and I don't think that that's something I do, right?
Mm.
I firmly believe in telling the truth, being honest, and I literally don't lie. Like I committed myself to never lying. I think I've accidentally slipped up like once or twice in the last like 10 years,
Mm.
right? And at the beginning it took a very, very long time. There were certain relationships that had to get recalibrated, right?
Mhm.
Because certain people, are just not. It's not going to work.
Sure,
but
sure.
um, but now I'm surrounded by people who expect me to tell the truth and want me to tell the truth and value the fact that I tell the truth. So I don't do any softening of the truth. I don't do any kind of hiding the ball. I don't try to be sneaky. That's not what I'm doing, and it's not what I advocate for.
Okay.
Um, but it's just that you can be, like you said, don't be a dick. The thing is, that's an easy rule to kind of everyone just say, yeah, don't be a dick. That's, of course. Right. But what does that mean? What does it mean not to be a dick? Now, if I'm talking to you, that might mean one thing, right? There's a certain threshold. But if I'm talking to somebody else who maybe is not as comfortable with debate, maybe is insecure about that particular idea, or feels very strongly about it because it's connected to their family or you know, their self-esteem or whatever it is. They have a sensitivity to that idea that they may not even necessarily be aware of. And once you start poking at it, they start freaking out. That being a dick there, the threshold is much lower, right? Because now you can be perceived by them at the very least as being rude and attacking them for doing much, much less than what it would take for you to feel that way, right? And that's just because you're two different people in two different places in your life, and you're talking about two different topics that you feel differently about. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. It's about recognizing that people are different and they have different thresholds for different reasons, and you don't know what those reasons are. And there are all these kind of complications about it. And if your goal is to communicate effectively and get through to them, you have to figure out where they're at so that you can meet them there and then go from that point. Right. So, you know, a lot of people say, like, listen, I'm just blunt. I just tell the truth. I just tell it like it is. Okay, sure. But that's going to put people off because not everyone's exactly where you are. Right. Not everyone thinks that. Yeah. And I made this mistake too. You know, once I learned something, James Baldwin has this great quote. You know, once somebody learns something, they act as if they've always known it, and they forget that they had to learn everything that they know.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
They forget that they once didn't know the thing they know and that they had to learn everything that they know. Yes. So I used to do the thing of, once I find something out, once I learn something, anyone who doesn't know it is an idiot. And I treat them that way. I go like, you're so stupid. How could you even think that? But how do I know that? How did I learn that? There was once a time where I didn't know it, and I had to recognize that and stop being a dick, because I have to realize, oh, this person maybe is where I was 5 years ago. And at the same time, I'm where someone way smarter than me was 5 years ago. So maybe I'm the idiot right now. Maybe I'm wrong right now. And it just keeps going that way. So that's really what it's about. You know, it's about calibrating and kind of, you know, again, martial arts. Like, you're not going to approach everyone you spar with in the exact same way, right? You're going to look at the guy and you're going to be like, okay, this guy's kind of leaning on his left a little bit. So maybe his right is a little weaker. Maybe I can take that. This guy's really big. I can't just like come at him. I have to try to use his weight against him, right? All those kinds of calculations you're making based on his physicality, based on, you know, how long they've been doing it, right? If they've got a white belt, that's totally different than if they've got a brown belt, right? And you know those things instinctively. You're looking at those things and you're saying, okay, I have to recalibrate. I have to figure out what to do here. I can't just one size fits all everything, because I'm going to get my ass kicked, right? It's not going to work.
And I think
right? It's the same with conversations.
Some advice there would be not to act like Conor McGregor, because you don't know if the person across the ring from you is Khabib.
Yeah. So that's exactly right. You don't know, right? So until you size it up, until you figure out, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. Or this person keeps kind of doing this, so I can take advantage of that, or I can do that, right? You do the same sort of calculations in conversation. You go, okay, this person seems really sensitive. This person, they seem very protective of this idea. So if I'm going to try to mess with that, I have to approach it carefully, because what I don't want is for them to turn around and go, I don't want to talk to you anymore, or whatever, right? I don't want to get them angry, because once they're angry, they're not listening. So if my goal is to get into that, then I have to recognize that there are right and wrong ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that you equated it with just everyday things that we do in life in terms of recalibrating how we speak, because we do it all the time, right? The way you speak with your friends, just jokingly, the way you speak with your friends, you probably don't make the same jokes to your parents. You probably don't say the same jokes to your or to your grandparents. Let's say you're probably careful with your nana when you're making jokes, right? We always do it. We recalibrate how we or not how we portray ourselves, but like how we act, or
you emphasize different aspects of yourself, right? Like you're not the same person exactly at work as you are with your best friend, as you are with your girlfriend or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. There are subtle things that you change, right? Like my wife tells me all the time, like, that's a friend joke, That's a sibling joke. That's not a wife joke. And I'm like, okay, you know.
Yeah, oh my god, you just gave me flashbacks of me putting on a rated R raunchy movie and my girlfriend saying, "This is a movie for you and your friends. I don't want to watch
Right.
this." Yeah, it's like,
Yeah. And that's good feedback, right? So
mhm.
now you know. Okay, yeah, I get
Yeah,
it. I
yeah,
get it.
cool. I'll put on
Right?
boring movies then with you.
And I I had to learn that stuff the hard way, right? I hung out with artists and weirdos. And then I worked at this office job and I just kind of went my usual way and I talked to HR a lot because that's not that's it's not the same it's not the same context. You know, you have to recognize that. Like, not everyone's comfortable with that. Not everyone's into that. And just because you are doesn't mean that that's normal, that that's the right way necessarily, right? It's just your preference versus theirs. And when you're in a kind of communal space, everybody has to agree on, okay, these are the general rules and these are the things that we, try to avoid because it makes certain people uncomfortable or whatever. It's human interaction, it's human relations. That's how it works, you know?
Mhm. So if people are individually different and you have to change the way in which you approach a controversial topic depending on who you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about, is there an average that's most effective, right? So in the context of like debates, we were talking
Yeah.
about debates earlier. If
Mm-hmm.
you have, if you're debating someone who goes against everything that you believe in, and you believe that if the audience follows that person, the country is going to be worse off.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in there is like individually different. You could make a joke that will offend half of the people there, and it'll turn them
Yeah,
off from
yeah.
their position. What's the average then? What would be the best way to debate?
Well, debates are competitions. So it's a different context, right? Kind of most of the time debates are kind of about applause lines and pot shots and kind of figuring out the best jujitsu argument you can make, right? Even if you're not right, even if you're kind of being sneaky, even if, you know, you didn't really make that point or you didn't really counter that point, you just made it sound like you did. There's all that kind of stuff, right, in debates. So I'm not a fan. That seems more just like performative. Um, but there are things that you notice, right? When if you make people laugh, that kind of just gets people more on your side, right? Oh, this guy's funny. I like this guy. And these are just human things, right? Charming people, good-looking people, right? People with tons of confidence. They are magnetic and people like them. That's why cults exist. That's why politicians are the way they are, right? They know how to go into a room and talk to everyone and make everyone feel like you're the only guy in here that I want to talk to. They have that vibe, right? So there are things about human nature that you can recognize, and even stand-up comedians, right? They can make a whole room of people laugh. Sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes the joke doesn't land. Sometimes it lands with only some people and not others. But part of their job is refining that stuff until they can get this critical mass of people finding this thing funny, because there's enough commonality in general audiences that you can do that. It's the same thing with arguments. It's the same thing when you're engaging on difficult topics. One thing that is pretty much universal across all human beings is that they like being listened to and they like feeling like they've been heard.
Hmm.
So asking questions and repeating things back and saying, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, and conveying that you are sincere in that. You have to actually be sincere and you have to convey that sincerity, right? People appreciate that. People go, no, this guy's actually listening to me. I like that, right? Because I feel strongly about this thing, and this person isn't just dismissing me. They're not just pushing me back. They're actually listening to what I have to say and understanding it. Everybody appreciates that, right? Everybody appreciates being heard and understood and being made to feel like they're not being attacked, right? That they're actually being engaged with in an honest way, on an honest level. So I try to default to those things. I try to default to that approach because I know that generally speaking it works. And you can hedge the things that you say, because it's true that not all woke people, quote unquote, think exactly this. right? Not all quote unquote woke people are hyper racist, for example, right? Like that's just true. Not all of them are, right? There are some people who are racist, and there are some people who are doing things that are effectively racist, but they're doing it for a reason that you can understand, and all that kind of stuff, right? So I would avoid speaking in absolutes, because especially when you're talking to someone who belongs to that group that you're criticizing, that person might be like, well, I don't feel that way. You're completely mischaracterizing me. And now you've lost, because you're not talking about a phantom that's not actually in front of you. So I would say, well, here's my issue with this idea or this behavior, right? And they'll be like, well, but this is the reason why this behavior is occurring. Okay, yeah, I get that. But the problem with that is this. And then now we're having a conversation, right? Now we're actually engaging, and the person feels like I'm listening to them and not judging them and not attacking them, and actually focusing on the thing that matters, which is that idea that they really care about and the thing that I'm trying to address, you know?
We're getting a lot of, but I wish more people felt this way, but like the fact of the matter is, like, because of the way social media is structured, it's really like we're getting a lot of trollish behavior online that's really bringing out the worst in
Yeah.
people. Like, it's what I call the derangement effect. Like, case in point, Elon Musk is just going out there just blaring stuff out, and just
Yeah.
not caring about what he says, and not trying to be careful at all. And like he's
Mm-hmm.
just one example. Like,
Yeah.
I want to bring it back around to a conversation we had several months ago. This is a dialogue I had with you, Angel. It really, really made an impact on me about how about my behaviors, but it really made me think about how what's going on right now in our present culture, with the zeitgeist having shifted
Mm-hmm.
somewhat. And just to remind our audience, the conversation went like this. I think I said something along the lines of, I think social media has made me more of an asshole. But you came back to me and said, like, did it really do that? Or like,
Mm-hmm.
did it just give you an avenue to act out your worst impulses? And that really struck me, because it reminds me of this philosopher's tale. I think it was Greek, or it doesn't matter. But where if someone gave you a ring, a la Lord of the Rings, you put it on, it made you invisible, and you could get
Oh,
away
yeah.
with practically any crime,
Mm-hmm.
anything. You could get away with doing practically anything in the world without consequence. What would you choose to
Mm-hmm.
do
Mm-hmm.
with it? And what does it say
Right.
about you? And like, like, if you decide to do one or two of these actions, even, and you justify it to yourself, it's just once or twice, but like you go into it and you keep doing it. And you eventually become a horrible version of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I see this reflexive pushback to, say, what's in our current culture. People who are so deranged by what's happening on the woke left and what's happening with Trumpism on the right, that they're just opposing these two forces, not so much because of any consistent principles, but they're just so triggered, so offended, so actively against something,
Mm-hmm.
that they just throw all their energies in a particular direction, and it just deranges anyone from having a conversation with anyone else
Yeah.
to find a way out of this mess. I just call this the derangement effect, and it just really asked me the question, well, how much you see on both sides now, and it really has
Yeah.
me asking the question, what are we becoming? And
We're not.
with social media especially.
Yeah. But, in keeping with that conversation that we had, I don't think we're becoming anything. We're just we're just being what we already are, or we're revealing certain things and emphasizing certain things, right? Everybody has those terrible instincts, like I hate gossip, for example. I hate when people are just talking about, oh, did you hear what this person said and this person did, and all that celebrity shit. But I get sucked into it too, because I'm just a person, right? And that's it's a trait that humans have. Gossiping is an evolved thing, and everyone succumbs to it. And it just depends. If I'm really intrigued by this musician or this actor or whatever, and I hear some crazy story, I go, oh wow, and I get sucked into it. And then sometimes it doesn't work on me because I don't care about Taylor Swift or whatever. So I have no interest, and I just go, oh, who cares? It's gossip. That's nonsense, right? But I'm full of shit because I care about it when it's something I care about. So the social media thing is the same. It's like, look, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm at home, I want to dunk on people. It feels good to dunk on people, right? It's not even like someone sits down and logs on to Twitter with the express purpose necessarily of like, oh, let me find some people to troll or dunk on. Some people do that, but it's also possible to just sit down and just be like, let me see what's going on, and then I'm going to respond to it because I've got to chime in here. And the way that they respond is, we need to defeat the enemy. We need to win this video game. That's how a lot of people treat it. So, I always say that it's only half true that these algorithms and these social media platforms are designed to get you really angry and upset and offended and enraged. That's only half true. They're designed to get and keep your attention. And it just so
Right.
happens that pissing you off, showing you things that make you upset, showing you comments that are ugly and are more likely to get you to respond angrily, that's the easiest way to do that. It's the easiest way to get and keep your attention. But we have more control over that than we think. We can decide, I'm not going to engage that way. I'm not going to take that bait because it's not good for me and it's not helping anything. It's just kind of me feeding this negative aspect of myself. I don't want to keep feeding that beast. It's not good for me. It's unhealthy, right? So we can decide that, and we can choose not to engage that way. And I know that it's possible because that's what I did. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stop. And if someone's rude to me, I'm not going to respond in kind because what's the point? And if someone spews vicious venom at me, I'm not going to do the same thing because I don't want there to be two people doing that. It's bad enough that there's one guy doing that right now. I'm not going to add to that by being another guy doing it. And I know that it doesn't score any points in the long run. I know that it's not going to, it's not victory for my side and my ideological perspective to have destroyed some random person who's probably a bot. You know what I mean? Like, it's stupid. It's a silly video game. So what can I do? I can engage in a way that I feel is more productive. I can, I'm not going to get through to Elon, right? Like, he's not going to see my tweets. He's not going to see my replies, but I can engage with people who are engaging with him. Right. And I can be a better example. I can be the thing that I want to see. And at the very least, I'm preventing myself from being corrupted in that way and going in that path that I think is wrong. But what tends to happen, what has been happening since I've been engaging this way, is I get to meet people like you guys. I get to talk on these podcasts. I get to find people who think similarly. I get to do great work because people value and appreciate that kind of engagement. They find it refreshing. They find it, oh man, finally, okay, good. This is way better. Yeah, I like this. So it resonates with people. And suddenly you realize, oh, we don't all have to be doing this. We don't all have to be pulling our hair out and acting insane. We can choose to behave differently. And that choice has effects. There's a ripple effect to that. I've seen it. And I'm just one person. I'm not remarkable in any kind of way. I'm just doing this thing and look what happens. So if everyone else starts doing it, who knows what might happen? That's the way I look at it. It is just, and you're always going to get people. I have plenty of people that I've tried to get through to them and it just doesn't work. And I just go, listen, it's not working. I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say here. So have a nice day. And that's it,
But
you know?
with regards to conversation, I think all of us. I first became aware of you several years ago. We had a brief X conversation. I didn't know who you were back then, and you didn't know
Mm-hmm.
who I was, but it was a really it was a really fun interaction we had.
Mm-hmm.
But those were back during the times of the now defunct IDW, in which there was a lot of emphasis on having conversation and dialogue back then. But
Yeah.
right now, I really got to ask, like, what the landscape of the conversational what the landscape of conversation is like, and what did we really accomplish? The
Well,
we're
who's we?
the people. Okay, yeah. Well, that's a good question too. It's like the people who are interested in for lack of a better term, the diving into the specifics, threading the needle
Hmm. Hmm.
between highly contentious issues, informing people of the nuances, and trying to, I hate using
Hmm.
this term, but hew to a centrist point of view in which you're trying to be objective as much as possible
Sure, sure.
between political
What
narratives.
have we accomplished?
And yeah, exactly. Because right now we're looking at several items that I consider cultural crises, or as my friend Thomas Sheedy might put it, a culture war 3.0,
Hmm.
a religious revival. There are new there are now new ideologues that are a result of what happened in previous
Yeah,
years. There is a
yeah.
movement that's in many ways a countercultural motion against just countercultural motion that's just absent reason. The Tate brothers are popular. Wokeism still alive and kicking.
Yeah,
Trumpism, the
yeah.
the abandonment of Ukraine, whatever, all that.
Hmm.
What was
Hmm.
really accomplished by the power of conversation? Like I really have to ask that.
Well, that's a loaded question because uh, the thing is that uh, if we're judging based on Twitter, right? Like if we're looking at Twitter and going, "This is the state of America. This is the this is a reflection, an accurate reflection of the state of America." Uh, that's pretty bad. But but that's not actually an accurate reflection of the state of America. Twitter is, a place. It's a place where very online people do very online things, and it's not going to give you insight into how your average American is feeling or thinking about anything. I think most people are reasonable and they just want to go on with their lives and they don't want to bother anybody and they don't want anybody to bother them, and they want, they have problems that they want dealt with and they're trying their best to figure out, what they can do to make that happen. Most people want to be reasonable. They're not trying to they're not trying to do this culture war thing. This culture war thing is an extremely privileged pastime, right? For a very, very, very tiny fraction of the American people.
Hmm.
It's something we all do because we get laptops and iPhones and we have the time to do that shit. We don't have 4 kids and, 2 jobs and all these real problems. We get to just sit around and bullshit on Twitter and fight with each other and blah, blah, blah. Right. And also, these social media platforms are siloing. So Twitter right now is Elon Musk's house party, right? Everyone who loves Elon is on Twitter and everyone's partying and they're loving it. And that's the cohort there. And all the people who migrated away are now on Blue Sky, and never the twain shall meet, right? These two bubbles just exist and they don't really communicate with each other. And I'm sure that their idea of what the other side is doing is getting more and more bizarre and outlandish and exaggerated and
Yeah,
far from reality,
yeah,
right? So we can't use that as a way of gauging whether anything we did was effective. What we can do is recognize, there are organizations like FAIR, there are organizations like FIRE, there are organizations like Braver Angels that tons of people are involved with and affiliated with and care about and support because they value those things. They value the conversation, they value sanity and principles and trying to remain principled amidst this chaos, right? So I would use that, and I would say we've accomplished a ton because 5 years ago we didn't have a lot of these things. 5 years ago there was no fair. 5 years ago, I'm not sure where Braver Angels was. It was probably nascent. I don't remember exactly when they arose, but there was a need, and people came together and created these organizations so that that need could be met. And tons of people said, yes, finally, thank you. So I think, to answer your question more briefly, like we need to be careful not to use the wrong barometers here in terms of gauging our success, right? And I don't mean to skirt the question. I just think these things never end, right? It's not like, oh, we're done. Conversations are done. We finished conversations, right? We finished engaging with one another productively. Now everything's great. That's never going to happen because life keeps going. The world keeps spinning. Problems keep coming up and humans are still human, you know? Um, but what I think we have accomplished, what I think we have done is establish the fact that there's a great many people we call the silent majority, the exhausted majority, whatever you want to call it, who are not, they don't feel represented by or helped by these warring factions that are on the extremes that are driving each other crazy and themselves crazy and just fighting constantly and are the subject of every freaking news story and Substack post that just keeps churning out, right? There's this giant machine. And then there are all these people who have nothing to do with the machine. Those are the people that I've been thinking of and that we've been trying to get connected with because we just want sanity, right? And we just want people to be reasonable, right? And we want things to kind of just move forward. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think of it that way. I just, I go on Twitter and I see what's going on, and it's not that it doesn't matter. It's not that it's not important what's happening there, but I have to contextualize it. This is not reality. There's a heightened version of reality that I'm looking at that is not representative. So like the nature of your question seems to come from this idea that it has to have shifted something there in that arena, but there's too much going on in that arena. There's too much going on in that arena. Like Elon took it over and it's a totally different thing now. And it's kind of an overcorrection to the overcorrection that was there before. And it's just going to keep ping ponging like that. But that's not an accurate representation of the overall situation, right? Most people are just exhausted. Most people are just like, dude, what are you guys talking about? This is insane. You know what I mean? Yeah. And, the thing, I think something that I say all the time with respect to star manning and, conversations and all that kind of stuff is I think it's wrong you have the wrong idea if you are approaching a conversation with somebody you disagree with, thinking that by the end of the conversation, they're going to agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not how people work, right?
Yeah.
Like how likely is it that someone could sit down and tell you in a single conversation and get you to believe that martial arts are all bullshit, all of them, right? Just think about that. You'd be like, there's no freaking way.
Yeah.
Certainly not in a single conversation, right? So it's the same for everybody else and everything else that they believe. The goal of a conversation should be that you both end the conversation open and willing to have another conversation. That should be the goal. Mm-hmm. It's not that you've convinced the person in a single conversation because that's just almost impossible.
Yeah.
But if you've engaged in a way where they go, you know what, I want to keep talking to that guy. That's the victory. And then who knows, 10, 20 conversations down the line, what might shift in you and in them. And that's the goal. That's the thing, is this constant process, right? Again, we can use martial arts, right? Black belt is a black belt, sure, but that's not the end of the road. You know that, right? The black belt's not the end of the road. You're not done, yeah. Right? It's really just beginning there, right? There are so many ways in which it's just beginning once you get that.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. There's a never ending process. This is just kind of an ocean that's constantly ebbing and flowing, and the currents are moving in all these different directions, and there are storms and there are waves, and that's how this works. So thinking of it in terms of an end, I think, is just the wrong way to contextualize it.
Okay.
I'd like to shift the conversation towards freedom of speech, free speech.
Sure.
Is a topic that has been discussed quite a bit. It was always discussed for a long time, but at least from my experience, it seems like a lot more people are talking about it now. I read a book, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. No, it was less than a year ago because I was in this apartment. It was a book called The Case Against Free Speech by P.E. Moskowitz. And one of the things that he said in that book, have you read it? I'm assuming you're familiar with it.
No, I haven't.
Oh,
I haven't
okay.
read it.
So the title of it, see, is a little bit misleading because it's not so much an argument against the philosophy of free speech, but
Mm-hmm.
rather how it is in practice, where he makes the argument that free speech doesn't actually exist in any meaningful sense, not in a way that we would
Mm-hmm.
actually care about. Um, and it reminded me, to give an example, like what he means is that in the 1950s, I believe, like the mid 20th century, there was a debate between the old liberals and the new liberals, where the old liberals, they believed what was of paramount importance was freedom, right? It's like freedom in the sense that no one is trying to force you to do anything. The government can't force you to do things that you don't want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then the new liberals came around and they said, well, we should probably come up with a much more, a broader and more nuanced understanding of freedom. Freedom shouldn't just be the ability to, make sure that no one else hurts you, or, no one impedes on your personal freedoms, but there's also a lot of freedom in terms of what you're allowed to do, right? Someone who's born into a disadvantaged family, their family barely makes any money, they can barely make rent. I mean, that person by definition has less freedom to do anything than someone who's born
Mm-hmm.
into a wealthy family. The person born into a wealthy family has more freedoms than the poorer person. And so a
Mm-hmm.
more nuanced understanding of freedom must include that. And similarly, what P.E. Moskowitz was saying about free speech is that, I mean, free speech, if you look at the upper class, they have more power with their freedom of speech than someone in the lower class, right? Usually you see like these rich politicians, or, rich billionaires purchasing, Twitter and stuff like that, where at the end of the day, if the only voices that you're actually hearing are the voices of the powerful, then when we
Mm-hmm.
talk about free speech, it really seems like it's mostly used as a political tool. Like you had earlier mentioned the lawsuit with Trump against Ann Seltzer. It's like, yeah, he's
Mm-hmm.
using the concept of freedom of speech. One, because people are going to hear that and be on his side. Yeah, this is a horrible
Right.
thing. But two, like he's just using it as a way to make his political opponents suffer and get what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question to you is, what are your thoughts on that, on the idea that freedom of speech in terms of, the government not being able to force you to say something that you don't want to say, or whatever it is, like it's not, it's the smoke screen is what he says. He says it's a dialectical smoke screen. The freedom of speech
Mm-hmm.
that really matters, that we should care about, is making sure that regardless of your socioeconomic status, there isn't this huge power imbalance. Your voice isn't completely drowned out by the rich people who own all these platforms, who have all these means of bankrolling companies. That's what we really should be concerned about. And this debate about freedom of speech on a very tiny granular level, I mean, it's a big nothing burger, is what they would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if I've heard this exact thing or if it was something similar. Um, it sounds like casuistry to me. Like, basically, it sounds like he's saying that free speech is really a tool of the powerful and that only the powerful really have it. Well, in dictatorships, sure. But in America, we have the First Amendment, which protects the freedom of speech of everyone, regardless of how much money they have. And in fact, there are First Amendment protections specifically to protect those people who do not have the means and the power that other people do, right? So the lawsuit that Trump is engaging in is what we call a strategic lawsuit against public participation, or a SLAPP suit, right? And it's done by people who have money, right? Someone like Trump has tons of money, and he can just throw money at a lawyer and just say, yeah, make this guy's life miserable, right? And you and I probably can't afford to do that, right? That would destroy my bank account trying to do something like that. So I don't have the power to do that. I don't have the power to just, throw a nonsense lawsuit up at somebody just to ruin their day. I can't do that. So there are First Amendment protections based on that knowledge, the fact that imbalance exists, right? So we know that powerful people can try to leverage and abuse the legal system to do that to people who can't defend themselves, or in defending themselves would bankrupt themselves and ruin their lives, right? We know that. So that's why Fire is defending Ann Seltzer against this lawsuit and pointing out the problems with slap suits, because this is an abuse of power that is in violation of the First Amendment. It's in violation of First Amendment freedoms. So there's that. And then there's also, for example, public figures, politicians, people like Donald Trump, people like, Sean Hannity or something. They are subject to much stricter, a much higher bar with respect to defamation, right? So if you and I say we're here and we just talk some shit about Sean Hannity, we say a bunch of shit, he can't automatically just sue us to shut us up, right? There are protections. There's a Supreme Court case called New York Times v. Sullivan, which was about the civil rights movement, and certain civil rights activists put this ad in the New York Times with a bunch of mistakes in it. They said that certain things happened that didn't exactly happen like that. There were a bunch of errors, right? And it was about the Alabama police department. And they were sued, and the New York Times was sued by the police chief, for defamation, right? And that's where the Supreme Court case landed, which is basically like, look, in the free exchange of ideas, in our discourse, there are automatically going to be things that are said that are incorrect or not exactly right. And if we allow people with means to just punish people for printing the wrong thing or making a mistake or printing something you don't like, that's going to chill speech. That's going to basically shut everyone up who doesn't have money and doesn't have power. Right. So we can't do that. So the New York Times v. Sullivan is something that Trump hates and wants to get rid of, because it doesn't allow him to just bully people. So I don't know. I guess I just disagree with the premise that free speech is something that only the powerful have. In America, at least, I don't think that's true. I think the First Amendment defends people's speech, especially when they do not have power. Because powerful people don't need free speech. They've got power. They've got money. They've got means. If you're in power, you can make people listen to you, and you can buy Twitter and say whatever you want and everyone sees it, right? But you and I, we can't do that. So that's what the First Amendment is there for. And the First Amendment has defended, gay rights activists, the civil rights movement. All of that happened because of First Amendment protections. Abolitionists, all the way back to Frederick Douglass. It was the First Amendment that protected his right to fight for abolition. Without that, imagine if it was really a tool of the powerful, and if it was really only available to powerful people, the abolitionist movement wouldn't have happened. They tried really hard to stifle that speech and shut it down, but they couldn't, because the First Amendment was there and the principles of free speech were preserved in that way. So yeah, I guess I just disagree with the premise.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're just conflating two separate issues, where it's like you have an issue of rich people, having more power in general than people who are poorer, but you can acknowledge that issue while also acknowledging that freedom of speech on its own is important. Just because you have wealthy people that try to use the concept of freedom of speech to get what they want doesn't mean that concept is mute or bad or not not worthy of protecting. Because as you said, I mean, freedom of speech is what helped a lot of the disadvantaged groups of people during the civil rights movements to gain the rights that they have now. So it's like to me, it came across like a separate issue that he was just they were identifying, they identify as non-binary, identifying like an issue that they don't like, wealthy people using freedom of speech, and then almost by osmosis, therefore not really caring for freedom of speech. But I'm not too sure. That's just how it came across to me.
I've heard similar arguments which kind of betray this desire to stifle free speech in general and just devalue it so that we can stifle it, because there are things that this person is, I'm not saying, this person necessarily specifically, but there are things that some people want to limit the speech of others. And so in order to do that, they try to devalue the principle of free speech itself and say that it's not as important as it seems, or it's only a tool for powerful people, because that's going to make it sound like you shouldn't be on that side, right? You should be on their side. Like, look, it's only for powerful people. They abuse it. But that's just not true. And if it weren't for the robust First Amendment protections that we have, this person wouldn't even be able to say that shit. So, so
Well,
it's just, it becomes this Ouroboros, you know?
Hmm.
we see a continuation of the protection of the less powerful today in rebuttal to that, in rebuttal to the idea that this is only for powerful people. I mean, like one of the continuations I would argue is the voices of coming from the atheist community. We see a beleaguered minority trying to speak out now. The ex and reformist Muslim communities that
Mm-hmm.
have an overreaching, pernicious term like Islamophobia being issued against them by organizations like CARE that have a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of power, a lot of voices in the government. Well, these reformist and ex-Muslim voices
Mm-hmm.
are limited, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, they've been able to grow into a force over the to be recognized over the last couple of years because of the First Amendment, because of their First Amendment rights and their ability to speak out. So, I
Yeah.
think that drills a hole right into the argument, right into this other guy's argument, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's an effect of the gifts that we were given from the First Amendment that's continuing today.
Right. Yeah. I just don't see how, I just don't see how you can argue against the right to speak. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense because then you're undermining your own capacity to criticize, right?
Yeah.
Like there's another case that Fire reported on, at least I'm pretty sure, but it was this guy who moved to Germany because he's like, fuck all this. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in the States, right? And uh, he now wishes that he had the First Amendment because he was protesting certain COVID policies or whatever, and he I can't remember the details now. I don't want to get it wrong, but he made some allusion or analogy to Nazi Germany in Germany, which is not allowed, right? But he wasn't promoting Nazism. He was using it as an analogy, but that doesn't matter, right? But he's like, well, but it's and so it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's the kind of thing that you don't necessarily value until you don't have it.
Hmm.
Free speech. I like to say free speech is kind of like breathing. Most of the time, you don't even pay attention to it. You just have it. It just happens. But once it's restricted, all you can think about is how you just want to be able to take one deep breath,
Yeah.
right? If you've ever had that feeling in your chest, like I can't breathe, like everything else in the world can just vanish. All I care about is, man, let me take one deep breath. It's kind of like that. Once it's restricted, when you don't have it, then you feel it and you go, oh shit. I mean,
Hmm.
there's this great book by Jakob Machangama. He's a senior fellow for Fire,
Yeah.
called Free Speech: A History from Socrates to
I
Social
love
Media.
that book. I love that
Great
book.
book.
Yeah.
Great book. The funny thing about the book is that every chapter is basically the same with different nouns because it's the story of humans saying, hey, this really sucks. Like, I want to be able to say what I want to say. I have criticisms and they're fair and I want to be able to voice them, but this guy won't let me. So we should fight to be able to voice these opinions. And then they fight it and then they attain that right. And then they turn around and go, whoa, you can't say that though. No, you guys got to shut up, over and over and over and over and over again until today. So it's just the kind of thing, Greg Lukianoff, the president of Fire, calls it the eternally radical idea. And it is, because everybody knows what it feels like to want to say something and feel like they're not allowed. And they know that feeling sucks. But everybody also knows what it feels like to say, man, I really wish I could just shut that person up.
Milton's
Yeah.
curse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the way it works, right? It's like, damn it. So you have to fight that urge to be like, well, defending their right to say that is defending my right to say what I want to say. I don't want anybody to shut me up, so
Yeah.
I'm going to have to let them speak too. Because once you start the shut up, the rolling blackout of shutting people up, it's going to end up on you eventually.
Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that Thomas Sowell said that I very much agree with is the idea that um, people often only think about the immediate consequences of a certain policy proposal, but it's
Mm-hmm,
very
mm-hmm.
difficult for them to think about the long the policy
Right.
consequences of in the long run. And I think when people see, stuff like hate speech or stuff like disinformation online, and
Hmm.
they immediately start softening on the concept of freedom of speech, I think it's a very myopic way to look at the situation. And I try to
Yeah.
argue. I try to argue in a sexy way to something that could fit in a soundbite, so that way it's attractive. And but argue that, look, in the long run, overall, if we put away our notions and our reverence for something like freedom of speech, I promise you the consequences are going to be so much worse in the long run. But it's very
Yeah.
difficult to convey that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, Hitchens did a good job with that.
mhm,
Getting back to Hitchens, to whom would you grant the right? To whom would you grant the power to decide for you what you get to see, read, and hear and
mhm,
say?
mhm.
Who do you know that deserves that level of power and authority over your ability to see something, read something, hear something, or say something? Do you know anybody?
Elon Musk, maybe.
Most people, most people might say, well, me, right?
Yeah,
If
me.
they have an answer, the answer is probably, well, me. Okay, let's just say you are the perfect human being who will execute that authority with absolute precision, and you will never falter, and you will be absolutely perfect at it. You're going to die one day, and then who does it? And what happens? Right? It's just even if you're perfect,
Yep.
you're not going to be around the whole time. You're not going to be in charge forever. Someone's going to be in charge after you. And do you trust that person? No. So maybe we just shouldn't give that power to anybody like that. Right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Bruce, is there, as we come to the concluding remarks, is there anything else that you would like to ask or posit?
Nothing that I'd like to add additionally to this, other than like whenever I speak to get a chance to speak to Angel, I really got to point out that every time we have one of these conversations, I always walk away learning something. So thank you,
Oh,
Angel.
well, thank you. That's very nice. And I feel the same way.
No. Well, we have one final question. That's probably the most important question. It's a very serious one, and uh, deep to my heart.
Here we go.
Um, do you think it was for the best to reboot Superman because of the failure of the DCEU to perform as well as it was expected to, or do you think they should have at least kept like Henry Cavill and the serious tone of Superman?
Um, this is a serious question.
No, really serious question.
um, uh, in the long run, I think it's better to just start over. Like, if it were me, I would have done basically the same thing,
Yeah. Hmm.
right? If they handed me the keys, I would have said, okay, this is a mess. And rather than try to figure out some way to clean it up, I'm just going to wipe it all clean and start over. Even though, I liked Henry Cavill, I feel like he got short shrift on the movies he was in. They didn't give him much to do that was very Superman-y. And, it was a different tone and approach from Zack Snyder that, in my opinion, doesn't understand the essence of those characters, doesn't really get why they're so beloved.
Hmm.
And I'm just waiting for all the Snyder fans to come after me now on Twitter.
All six of
I
them.
liked, I really liked Man of Steel. I saw it 6 times in theaters. Right. I love Man of Steel. Batman v Superman came out on my birthday, and they killed Superman on my birthday. So yeah, that was a weird birthday. I just walked out of the theater like they killed. First of all, they killed him in the second movie, and it's also my birthday, and I just watched Superman get murdered. So, you know, I appreciated a lot of that stuff, but yeah, overall, they rushed into the Justice League thing, and it was really clunky, and those movies kind of, it just, there was no plan, and it just kind of didn't work for
Hmm.
the most part. Certain things were cool. Wonder Woman was cool.
The first
Zack
one.
The Snyder cut of Justice League was good. Still kind of, overall, whatever, but
Yeah.
it was good. Wonder Woman, yeah, the first Wonder Woman was good. Shazam was good. But yeah, I would have done the same thing as a creative person, as a writer. I would have gone in there and been like, I can't salvage all this. This is too much. It's a disaster.
Hmm.
I would really like to just start over. So I totally get James Gunn coming in there and being like, we're just going to reboot this shit.
Hmm.
And that requires recasting because it's going to be too confusing. And, yeah, the new guy, David Corenswet, looks great. The trailer looked great. I'm excited. James Gunn is saying all the right things in terms of, the essence of the character and what it means and who he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to mean to the world and what his ambitions are for the movie. So it all sounds great and I'm excited to see it. And hopefully I come out of that movie theater crying in a good way.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. I love that. That's the correct
Yeah.
answer. It's so weird when
Yeah.
people try to say that they want to salvage either like the Snyderverse or keep Superman or whatever. I'm like, have you, like, for one, it has to be
Mm-hmm.
tonally consistent, and two, like, have you seen Wonder Woman 1984? Like, this shit sucks. Like, resist this. This is garbage.
It
What
was
is
bad.
this? Oh
Yeah,
my
it was
god, I was
bad.
so bored.
It was
Um,
bad. Yeah,
yeah.
it's just it was a mess. There was no plan. Nobody was really paying attention to it or running things.
Mhm.
And now it seems like they have a plan. They're thinking things through. I think the one thing that is, if anything, is going to be the mark of success for this new DCU is the fact that they will not greenlight anything until they have a completed script that they
Oh, I didn't know
feel is
this.
good.
Okay, I
Okay.
Right.
didn't know
So
that.
so James Gunn has said, like, we're not going to greenlight anything. No cameras will roll until we have a script that we all feel good about.
Mhm.
Because this thing of, he said it's hard enough to make a movie, with a completed script. It's almost impossible to make a good movie when you don't even know how it ends yet and you're writing it as you're shooting it
Mhm.
and you're figuring out the story as you go. Like, that's crazy. Why
Yeah.
you're spending $200 million and you're doing that? That's insane. So they're waiting until it's written and set in a way and it feels good and they think it's a good compelling story and then they will shoot it.
Mhm.
And so I feel good about that and I feel good about everything he's saying. I mean, he's a huge comics guy and he really appreciates the characters, seems to understand them. I love Creature Commandos. That was cool. And yeah, I'm really excited for Superman. It's gonna be hopefully a wonderful time at the movies.
All right. Yeah, that's all. Yeah, we don't need another headless Superman and the Shazam after credits. We don't need any more of that. But
Right.
okay, awesome,
Yeah.
Mr. Eduardo. Thank you so much for joining us and lightening up our moods. Certainly. But yeah, is there anything else that you would like to say or anything that you'd like to plug?
No, just check out Fire at thefire.org. Check out Fair at fairforall.org. Donate to those organizations and follow them and stay principled, stay human, stay compassionate. It's hard out there, but it's harder if you stop trying. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and thank you so much for checking this episode out. Have a great day, everyone. Anyways, this is a really off the cuff episode where we ramble about the advent of artificial intelligence and its effects on the job sector as well as its effects on the human psyche. Emphasis on off the cuff. If you're interested, you can join the Discord server that we just created. The invite is in the description of the video below. With that, I hope you enjoy the episode.